Hey, folks. Let me get a few things adjusted here. Hey, I just want to mention to everybody uh, next Tuesday and Thursday, I'm going to be on the road. I don't think we'll have a Thursday night bar night simply because I'm going to be up in the Sierra Nevada mountains and I have no idea what kind of Wi Fi connection I'm going to have at my sister in law's place. But Thursday night, I'm going to be in Reno and I'm going to be attending Tailhook 25. So any of you that are in Reno or might be traveling to be at Tailhook, come see me. Grand Sierra Resort, and man, Tailhook's a lot of fun. The industry floor is what's really cool. Hey, Tommy, welcome back. The industry floor at Tailhook is what's truly amazing. Last year they had the new F-18 Super Hornet cockpit, the F model front and back seat. Jason, how are you? Doing well. They had the F-35 simulator. Lockheed did. Actually, Lockheed had two of them. They had the T-50 also, the trainer, which was pretty cool. Let me start with the F-35 simulator. Obviously, it is a dumbed down version of the real one. It's unclassified, but there was two scenarios that they had in it. One was a bombing mission, surface attack mission, and one was a air-to-air mission. And it was called a raid mission. Now, I don't know if you guys know what a raid is. Yeah, I hope you're doing better, Jason. The raid was one F-35, me in it, in the simulator, against 6 Su-27 flankers. 6. So that means you're going to have to use a gun. You have the two AMRAAMs. It had two AIM-9Xs on the wings, on each wing, one on each wing. And of course the gun. And the gun doesn't have a lot of ammunition in it. The gun only holds, I think, like 150 rounds. It's really a small number of rounds in the gun. So you have to be very judicious. You can't hold the trigger down for very long. I think the guy said it was like 3 2-second bursts or something like that. And all the ammo was out. So the guy that was the sim instructor had been an F-35 guy in the Marine Corps. Okay. And he just kind of walked me through everything. There is a lot of switches on the throttle and the stick. And more so than other airplanes, in my opinion. All of them had proper functions, locking things up, moving the radar out, the radar range out, the cameras, everything, the distributed aperture system. But I'll tell you something. So all 6 airplanes are coming right at you. And of course, I've flown an F-15, so I know a little bit about how the radar works. And as I lock each one of them up, the camera system zoomed out there. Where are they at? They're at about 50 miles. And you could even tell what missiles the flankers were carrying. It was that good. And I even said to the guy, I said, really? I mean, you can see the paint scheme on the airplane and the nozzles, exhaust nozzles, and what missiles it's carrying. He goes, the real one's a lot better. So, Tommy, I didn't get to hear the 101-year-old World War II pilot. If you have a link, Tommy, put it in the chat for me, will you? So I can copy it down. Anyway, you always shoot the closest alligator. And of course, that alligator, that Su-27 was coming at me pretty fast. He was high, fast, and launched one AMRAAM and hits him right in the face at about 25 miles. Second AMRAAM goes off, hits the next guy at about 23 miles. Then you still have 4 airplanes you got to fight. But the AIM-9X has got pretty good range when you're going nose to nose. So launched one of those, got a third guy, and now we've pretty much passed the other 3. The F-35 does not have the same maneuvering characteristics as the F-22 does not have thrust vectoring. So it doesn't make those sharp button hook turns. But it still turns pretty good, don't get me wrong. And of course, it's got massive amounts of power. So come around the corner, finally get the 4th guy locked up. Sidewinder comes off, does this big, it's really crazy. Comes off and goes like this and starts heading down. I'm like, where the heck is it going? And it's just pulling lead. It was just doing its thing and hits the 4th guy. And now it's just the 2 flankers that I'm going to have to gun. And these flankers that I was fighting had the forward canards, okay? And my gosh, those things are very maneuverable. You have to remember, flankers have forward canards and thrust vectoring nozzles too. And I'm in an airplane that doesn't have that. So it was tough. Made several passes at these guys. Finally got the 5th one with the gun, but only had like 60 rounds left or something like that. Not very much. And basically got in a tail chase with the last guy, the 6th guy, going downhill, heading toward the dirt. And finally was able to pull up on him, but I burned a lot of gas getting there. Flanker is a fast airplane. Anyway, across the displays, I had it partitioned into 4 different screens. So one was like the weapons page. The next one was like the God's eye view of what's going on around you. And of course, it's feeding you data link, all kinds of stuff too. Okay. Yeah, Jason, the canards do a lot, but there's drawings of the new F-47, and guess what it has? It looks like it has forward canards. We'll wait and see. Anyway, the flankers did shoot some Alamos at me, but again, radar missile defense and the low observable properties of the F-35 was pretty superior. Oh, there's one other thing I forgot the F-35 has. That's towed decoy. You'd think, why does a low observable stealthy airplane have a towed decoy? And the reason is, like all other airplanes, that towed decoy sends out electronic beeps and squeaks so that Radar locks onto it. Radar guided missiles lock onto it. You want to hear a cool story about towed decoys? Now imagine this. Okay, a B-1 bomber is a big, big target. When you talk about radar cross section, the B-1 has a pretty good cross section, radar cross section, and this is over Kosovo. So we're talking 1999, and an SA-6 Gainful launched on the B-1. And as you know, there's a defensive system operator in the B-1, sits in the back with the WISO, or do they call him CISO now? Combat Systems Operator. Anyway, welcome the Brits. Glad to have you here. My name is Mark Acera, KC-135 pilot. I'm talking about B-1s, towed decoys, and the war in Kosovo. So this B-1 is launched on by an SA-6. And according to what was on the tapes, the defensive system operator goes, "Watch this." And he puts that thing out there, and it's basically a bullet, a very long bullet, connected to the airplane through a fiber optic cable, so that the raw system, radar homing and warning system, and all of its countermeasures are feeding into the towed decoy. And sure enough, I think it was the co-pilot was looking out the window and can see the missile coming. And if there's no movement in the window, that means it's coming for you. The relative movement of the missile is keeping pace with the relative movement of your B-1. And all of a sudden, that towed decoy got turned on, and that missile went like this and took out the towed decoy. If you want to hear more about towed decoys in combat, this was in 99 in Kosovo, the Brits. This was the air campaign called Allied Force over Kosovo. If you want to read a really good book, and I hope most of you probably have this, Dan Hampton's book, Viper Pilot, he talks about towing that thing behind him during the shock and awe campaign, the Iraqi freedom invasion of Baghdad. And he talks about where he's like in this big sandstorm, and he knows things are looking at him. He knows things are trying to fire at him. And he's down in all the sand and everything like that. And he looks down, and of course, on your display, it tells you if the decoy is still there, or it's been taken out, or it's been snipped. Okay. There's 3 ways to get rid of it. Hit the thing, blow it up, snip the thing. In other words, you cut the fiber optic cable and the thing just falls. And what's the third one? Oh, you just like turn it off, the on off switch. And so it's not masking anything, nor is it emitting. And if I remember right, it not only emits, but it also receives. So it can be a sensor too, from what I understand. So these towed decoys, they're called ALE-50s. If you go and look at F-16s, you'll see this box on the stations 2 and 6, where they usually have AIM-9X. They'll have a box that has 2 little doors on it, and that's the towed decoy. B-1s have, I think, 4 on a side. So they've got up to 8 of these things that you can deploy, and the radar actually looks at it because emits, and I guess the way it emits, it makes the decoy the bigger target. And apparently F-35s have them. I have pictures of them in Air and Space Forces magazine. By the way, I don't know if you guys know, when you become a member of the Air Force Association, every month you get a magazine. This month's magazine is all about the Midnight Hammer mission. I've not read it yet. I've not gone through it yet, but I will, and then Thursday night we'll talk about it. Okay. Anyway, even low observable airplanes have countermeasures. All of you have seen the F-22 display where it's popping off flares, and it also has chaff bundles too. You wouldn't think, it's a low observable airplane. Why do I need that? Okay. Anyway, Ranger, welcome. You just missed a discussion about B-1s, towed decoys, and an engagement with a SA-6 over Kosovo, where the defensive system operator told his crew, watch this, trailed the thing back behind him, and sure enough, the missile went for the decoy instead of the bomber. Great stuff. Anyway, you guys have any questions for me tonight? I didn't really come prepared with anything that I wanted to talk about specifically, other than, next time Thursday, I'll go through this article. I think I mentioned in the last time we did this that President Trump mentioned in a briefing that there was 59 tankers involved with the Midnight Hammer airstrike. That's a lot of tankers. I can't remember how many was involved in El Dorado Canyon, but it was a bunch too. The airplanes, the F-111s, were all on a KC-10. If you want to hear more about that, go listen to my episode with my good college friend, Mike Etheridge, because he was on the lead KC-10. He had the F-111 guy aboard who said, we're late, push it up. And some really fascinating things there. Anyway. So, any questions? Okay, Jason, what's the difference between the E and the R models of the RC-135? Okay, so E and R's actually are for the KC-135s. The RC-135s are like U, V, and W. The difference, no worries, Brits. Welcome back. The difference between the E's and R's is the biggest one is the engines. So the E models, the Guard and Reserve said, hey, look, in order to get better range or increase our offload capability, let's take the old A model J57 water burning engines off, which burn like 14 to 13,000 pounds an hour for like the first 2 hours. I mean, they were very, very fuel inefficient. And the E models got the 707-320 engines, the engines that you normally see on the Pan Am airplanes, American Airlines, the later engines. They're called JT9Ds. Those were the civilian versions of the TF-33. So, of course, they had thrust reverse, all those good things on them. And that significantly reduced the burn rate of the KC-135 down into the 11 to 12 range, for the first couple hours. But then came along the CFM56 engines, which there's a great book out there, and I can't remember the name of the guy that wrote it. It's called The Power to Fly. And I suggest all of you get this in your library, because it's written by a General Electric engineer who was in their engine department, and he talks about engines from the 50s all the way up to like the 80s, and he had like 40 years there. All right, we almost didn't get the CFM 56 engine because the core was classified. The core of the CFM 56 engine was going to be the core of the B1 engine, and so it was classified secret. And there was a whole bunch of negotiating that went back and forth between the Nixon administration, the Pompidou administration, that allowed that engine to come into being. And now they've sold like 40,000 of these engines. They're really, really efficient and have gotten even more efficient. We were really happy when the R models came out with the new CFM 56 engines on them, because now we're burning 10,000 pounds or less with the KC-135. We can take off with more gas. We could go up to 195,000 pounds. It had 5 rotor brakes on it. They took off the thrust reverse in Strategic Air Command's infinite wisdom. They said, no, we're not putting that on. And you're like going, ugh. Because that would have allowed us to go into a lot more places. And then beefed up the wings. They actually detuned the engines. At that time, the KC-135s, when they were first getting the CFM 56s, the engine was rated at 28,000 pounds. And that was the goal, was to have 20,000. They wanted to have a 20-ton engine thrust is what they were looking at. Okay. And the CFM 56 had that in spades. Excuse me. I just had another fly go down the hook. It's really warm here in Utah today. Anyway, they detuned the engines from 28,000 down to 22 to increase the life of the engines. So the KC-135 R model engines are not quite as powerful as like you'd see on a 737. But I can remember flying home from Honolulu one afternoon, and we were burning about 7,500 pounds an hour. And for a big 4-engine jet, that's nothing. Particularly, we were carrying, I think, 130,000 pounds of gas. The most I've ever taken off was 190,000 pounds. And that was a pretty long takeoff roll, even for an R model. It's about 7,500 feet. But the engine's got so much thrust and everything. I mean, that's one of the great things about it, is you can get all that gas in the air. So welcome back, buddy. Good to see you back, fatty. You and I need to talk, man. Going to Tailhook to see all my Navy bros next week. All right, all of you. The gentleman that goes by Fatty there is a very dear friend of mine who worked with me. It's not for me. Worked with me on my team during the Iraqi freedom. He is a KC-135 expert, a weapons school grad, and just a great guy to be around. Hey, oh, did you really? Where'd you see Badger? Where are you at? Where in the world is my good buddy Peaches? Panthers S. Welcome. I've not seen your name up here, but I appreciate you showing up. But yeah, as my good buddy here is saying, that he and I both flew our models together, and man, it was just It was a different airplane from the A models. Peaches, did you fly A models at all? I was just curious. So anyway, Jason, that's the difference between the E model engines and the R model, the E model KC-135 and the R model. And all of the E models went through the same process and were all converted to R models. So the reserve, the guard, all have R models, just like the active duty does. Now, in a strange twist, oh, you didn't have to fly the A models, Peaches? That's good. You didn't miss much. In a strange twist, and this is one of the things that we had to overcome during Iraqi freedom. And Peaches, you remember we had to write this down. We had to ask permission for the guard and reserve to be able to fly the active duty airplanes, and the active duty guys to be able to fly the guard and reserve airplanes, even though the airplanes were almost virtually identical. They had a different designation though, because the active duty airplanes were, if I remember right, Peaches, block 35, and the guard airplanes were block 37 airplanes, but they were virtually identical airplanes. All right. And we had to actually get a 2-star general's approval to mix and match. And, you would think, hey, that's just common sense. And you're right, it is. But at that time period, there was one of these rules that active duty couldn't fly guard and reserve airplanes. And it had gone back a long ways, and probably, Jason, because of the engine difference, the E models in the guard and reserve. So that, that was a big difference, obviously, in the airplanes. Well, now the cockpits are virtually identical. The airframes are identical. And so it seemed crazy that we had to write that letter, which got instant approval, because they all went back and went, wait a minute, what's this based on? Oh, the E model engines and the R models. All right. Well, the cockpits are virtually identical. I had to list all of the things why the airplanes were no different. And sure enough, they came back and says, yeah, sure. And Peaches, you remember, we had, what was it, like a 1.6 crew ratio in the active duty R models. And a lot of the guard and reserve units had been called up, but we didn't have any place to put their planes. We'd run out of basically ramp space and ability to put gas in airplanes, but we sure as heck needed the crews. So we had the active duty, guard, and reserve crews flying out of Prince Sultan, and a couple of the other big bases too, just because we could fly more sorties if we had more air crews to do it. The KC-10 didn't have that problem because the KC-10s were 2.0, 2 crews per airplane. So we could pretty much fly them almost 4 times a day. We could fly each airframe 4 times a day. They were taking off with 320 fuel loads because of that damn tree at the end of Al Dhafra's runway. What did you call it, Peaches? The UAE National Forest or something like that you put up on some slide. We could take off with more gas if we could cut down, the UAE National Forest at the end of the runway. Yeah, that lone tree at the end of the runway. It's this one tree that has been at the end of the runway for I don't know how long. I mean, decades, okay? And they wouldn't let us cut it down. They just said, look, we can operate our KC-10s with more gas, but when you do your takeoff data to figure out, all the speeds, it's based on losing an engine. It's based on like the worst case. Okay. So you have to be able to go up over that tree. Okay. Yeah, Ranger, debt cord in the middle of the night. Believe me, we had all kinds of ways we were going to get rid of that tree. Okay. You know, oh man. Yeah. Just go out and debt cord the tree. But they wouldn't let us cut it down. And so instead of taking off with 340,000-pound fuel loads, which the KC-10 was capable of, because that tree was there off the end of the runway and it was considered an obstacle, um, they had to back up to 320. Now the weather was getting a lot warmer too, and the chief of weather said, "Hey, the first week of April is when there's going to be what we call thermal crossover." Um, and what that was, it would be 100 degrees at all the air bases. And at 100 degrees, that's where you start downloading gas or downloading bombs. Of course, you never download bombs. And so the B-1s were taking off with less fuel, but still taking off with 24 weapons in its bay. Well, that exasperated the fuel problem because we were taking off with less fuel. And that's why I kept, for our models, 180 fuel load, because that allowed you to leap over everything. You could take off no matter what the condition was, even if you had a tree off the end of your runway. And yeah, that's right. Yeah, Peaches Castle had that one tree off the end of the runway. Crazy. Okay. Great question, Brits. The KC-10 was air refuelable. All of them were air refuelable, so we could fill them back up in the air. KC-135s, there was only 8 of them. 8 KC-135s that did the special operations missions were air refuelable. Those were all in one squadron at McConnell. We called them Christines, and they were specifically for refueling the special ops the MC-130s, AC-130s, those kinds of airplanes. And they had a special rendezvous procedure that they did on night vision goggles to join up, because they would do it at 3,000 feet, all blacked out. So it was pretty crazy. Okay. You got a tanker that refuels a tanker? Yeah, we do, Ranger. Like I said, the KC-10s were always getting filled up by the 135s, particularly during what we call the coronets. A coronet is where you're moving like F-15Es from Seymour Johnson over to Europe or over to the Middle East. Those are called coronets. And typically there would be 4 to sometimes 6 F-15 or just fighter airplanes on the KC-10. They're named after colors, like tan and gold and brown and all those kinds of things. And the 135s would refuel them along the way. So as the KC-10s moved east, they would be refilled, and they would take on usually about 80,000 pounds each time they hooked up with a 135. Hang on just a sec. Ah, yes. Peaches brings up the Iron Maiden, our Navy bros' best friend on the KC-135, because it weighs like 150 pounds. It's like the wrecking ball. Now the KC-10, on the other hand, has really soft Nerf baskets, and the Navy and Marine Corps and our international bubbas that do probe and drogue refueling love refueling behind the KC-10 because of those soft baskets. Yeah, iron love. And there's been numerous times where, as my good friend here says, Peaches says, Fatty says, get some iron love, okay? Where the basket on the 135 is literally comes off. And there's been a few basket issues even with the KC-10. There's some great video even on YouTube that shows the basket coming off. Now, it's not so much the problem of the basket coming off because it sticks to the probe. The real problem is the wiring that holds the basket down to the hose. And we call it the slinky because when it came off, it looked like a slinky. And that wire, that slinky, would start banging around the airplane. And heaven forbid it go like in an F-14, F-18 engine intake. There's a famous story that I have of out of Operation Anaconda, where one of the F-18s, I think it was off the Stennis, took the basket off of a KC-10. And the slinky, that big wire bundle that attached the pipe to the hose, and they would wrap this wire around it, okay, and they do it really tightly so it held it on like one of those bands that you screw down and ratchet down. In this case, it's this slinky. Well, the basket came off, and that slinky went whack against the canopy on a Hornet at night in the wintertime over Afghanistan. And one of the great pictures that came back to us that we kept at our ops desk, I guess the wingman, it was like early in the morning, so it was still dark outside, but in transit back to the boat, back to the carrier, the sun came up and they were able to take pictures of it. And if I remember right, the Hornet pilot is kind of leaning against the windowsill. He's kind of like this, like going, crap. Okay. Nuts. Because one of the other problems that you have with the basket during a trap is it could come off and go boom, 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 boom down the landing area, down the deck. And that's one of the things you got to be careful of. Normally they stay on, but there's been once or twice that I've heard of where it has actually come off and gone, dink, dink, dink down the down the carrier deck. But that slinky wire went whack and took the canopy off. The whole plexiglass canopy just exploded around this guy. And so he's at 22,000 feet over Afghanistan, early in the morning, dark in the wintertime. And so he kind of hunkers down behind the windscreen, and he's got the environmental control system and the heat basically turned all the way up. And what one of the Hornet guys told me was he was warm from like the waist down and cold from like the waist up. Had on a coat, a fairly heavy flight jacket. But even that, because, you're flying through the air and it's cold, it's wintertime in Afghanistan. He was pretty cold while he's getting back. And obviously he came down out of altitude too, trying to help himself out, get out of the cold. He lands on the carrier deck, and of course they take him right into one of the flight surgeons to check him out because he was a little hypothermic. But that wire slinky coming off will slap the canopy or slap the side of the airplane and really cause some problems. Now, there's one other thing. Yeah, iron and deep fried rubber. Exactly. Iron and deep fried rubber. The end of our basket, and we've got a rigid basket, not a collapsible one, and it weighs, I think, over 150 pounds. But it's got this big rubber ring around the back edge of it. And so when the probe comes in, that rubber edge kind of protects it. But here's the other thing that they have with these things, okay? It's called a basket slap. How many of you have seen Navy airplanes with the air refueling probe door off or gone. They do that specifically. And what they're trying to do is they take that door off so that if they get a basket slap, that won't be the first thing to come off and go flying who knows where. Hopefully not down into the engines. And that's happened before. And so when a lot of these airplanes deploy, they take that probe door off so that if they have a basket slap, it doesn't tear it off. Hey, Cade, welcome. Panther S, the slinky going rogue make you go wild. Yeah. And the pilot said when it slapped the canopy, and obviously the canopy just came apart, it was loud. But anyway, back to basket slaps. So every once in a while, in bad weather or turbulent weather, the basket's obviously bouncing all over everywhere. And it will come up and slap you, okay? Hang on just a second. Another phone call. Anyway, the basket slap will leave like a black mark on the airplane when it hits it, okay? It will leave that rubber boot will leave a big black mark on the side of it. And sometimes that basket slap will break canopies or windscreens. It will certainly take the probes off, and has many times. And we had a problem with our brand new KC-135 multi-point refueling pods. And at first we couldn't figure this out, and thank heavens I had guys working for me like my good buddy Fatty here, okay? Remember this, Peaches? We had to figure out why the MIPPERS pods were slapping the Navy and slapping them pretty hard. And we got out the Navy's air refueling manual and found out that they would approach the basket with 10 to 15 knots of overtake. Well, the take-up reel springs on the new pods was only set for like 5 to 8. So what would happen is they'd come up and they'd hit it pretty hard. And the hose would get this sine wave in it, and the sine wave would go up to the pod, shake the pod real good, but then come back down toward the basket and sometimes would snap the probes off, or it would just rattle the airplane really good. And I talked to a Hornet guy that had one of these sine wave experiences. And he said, Sluggo, you can feel it through the whole plane. When that sine wave goes up and it's coming back, we just kind of go like this, because there wasn't anything you could do about it. All right. It happened so fast. So, the sine wave go up, back about that fast. And you kind of just go, when's it going to break? And obviously we had to get that fixed. Well, this is where we had the company that made the pods, Cobham, really stepped up to the plate, folks. The Cobham folks who made the pods, we wrote to them and said, we got a problem. The Navy's air refueling manual says, 10 to 15 knots of overtake. Your take-up reel springs are probably set to 5 to 8, and it's causing this sine wave. And we've had a number of basket slaps. Guess what? Cobham sent field service engineers to the Middle East, to Akrotiri on the island of Cyprus, and adjusted and worked on every stinking pod. Even though they were brand new, they still had to have that adjusted. And that company will always be huge in my mind. because they could have just taken the pods back. And I told them, I says, we can't afford to take the pods back. Can you afford to bring your field service engineers over here and adjust these things? And they said, yeah, sure, we can do that. And so they sent a whole team over and they fixed every stinking pod that was deployed in theater. We bought 33 pod sets. Okay. Hi, Michelle. Welcome back. And I think we had 29 in theater. We had them all at Aquateria because they were refueling the Navy. A matter of fact, 2 Navy carrier air wings. So we put all of the brand new air fueling pods for the 135 at Aquateria. And Cobham did just a bang up job. Adjusted every one of them, and that includes having to download them off the plane, put them on their little dollies, break them all apart, fix them. Then they looked them all over to make sure everything was correct in them, load them back up onto the airplane, and then you got to do a fuel systems check of the pods and make sure that the pods are working right, meaning, reeling them out, reeling them back in, everything. Cobham did it all. And then finally reported back to us, hey, we've done every pod now. And they're all good now. And even if the ones come over from the States, to replace one that gets damaged somehow, they're all good now. And we didn't have another incident with the Bippers pods breaking off probes ever again. Okay. These events no happen much. Yeah, Panther S, I'm reading yours here. It's just one of those things that happens, man. That slinky came off. It wasn't so much the basket, it was the slinky. Michelle, on the subject of fixing all the ones in theater, would the military fix some planes in an effort to find out if there was a solution or not? No, because we already knew what the problem was. And we spent time on the phone with Cobham, and that's how I found out. That's how we found out. Fatty and our team found out. Okay, they're set to 5 to 8 knots of overtake, not 10 to 15. And then we said, oh, we got to fix this. And Cobham said, we're on our way over. And literally, they had field service engineers in theater in 48 hours at Aquateria. And, I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they got, I guess they all have passports and can go wherever they need to go. But yeah, it was pretty crazy. So, Supreme Eater, welcome back, brother. Is it true the C-5 aircraft would cause the tail of the 135 to push up from the air pressure underneath it? Yes. The bow wave of the C-5 would come under the airplane, and that bow wave would push our tail up, meaning our nose would go down. And so you really had to watch the trim. And the C-5 had to do it slowly. Not only come in slowly, but back out slowly. Because if it backed out too fast, the physics between the two airplanes, and I can't remember the term I'm looking for. It's like Venturi effect, but I can't remember exactly. The physics between the two airplanes, if it backed out too fast, would cause the tanker to descend in front of the C-5. And that was really scary. And I know somebody, I know somebody that had that happen where the C-5 pulled back too fast. It was the same with the C-17 because it's got a big bow wave too. And here's one of the crazy things is, Peaches, what did they call them? Heavy receivers. It was like category M receivers or something like that. Anyway, as part of our training beans to stay current, you had to do autopilot off with a heavy receiver, such as a C-5 or a C-17. And I know I've mentioned Bernoulli. Thank you, Ranger. So what you had to do, the boom operator would call the pre-contact position is 50 feet. And so he would call, or she would call every 10 feet, 50 to 40. He's at 40. He's at 50. He's at 40, 30, 20, 10. And what you would do is you would trim the airplane 1, 2, 3 on the elevator trim every 10 feet. Okay, is it 40? 1, 2, 3. About that fast. Okay, is it 30? 1, 2, 3. At 20, 1, 2, 3. Is it 10? 1, 2, 3 on the electronic trim. Okay. Oh, I even forgot about the limits demo. Peaches brings up a really good point here. Okay, I'll get to that in just a second. And so the airplane was pretty trimmed up by putting all that trim in while it's moving in. And when it's moving out, you have to go the other way. So you're going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 for every 10 feet it's moving out. All right. And Fatty's brought up a really good point here. When you do autopilot off, as part of autopilot off, they would do what's called a limits demo. So the C5 would go to the lower limit, to the upper limit, to the left limit, and to the right limit. And that was part of their instructor check, not so much for us as it was for them. And they would do these limits demo. And with a C5 and that big bow wave in front of it, you really had to stay ahead of the trim. And Peaches, did you do the whiff when you were going through instructor upgrade, or was the whiff gone by the time you went through? Just let me know in the chat. So when I went through instructor pilot upgrade, we had this thing that we called the whiff. And some of you may have seen this, where the B-52 is 90 degrees to the earth. And it's connected to the tanker. Oh, they just banned it? Okay. So you'd go 90 degrees, and what you do is you'd go up and you'd make this leaf like this, okay? And you just let the nose drop, all right, at 90 degrees. Literally 90 degrees of bank, okay? And then you'd roll out at the bottom like this, and then pull about a G and a half to come back up, okay, like this, and then you would go the other way. And you would do several of these leaves, particularly for each instructor pilot. And it was purely demo. The instructor pilot upgrades were just sitting in the seat when you're doing it. The instructors that were teaching us would do the demo for us. It was the strangest thing, but it was to show you, it was a confidence builder, and to show you, hey, look, the laws of physics don't change when big airplanes are at 90 degrees. You just have to be really, really precise and really soft with the airplane, okay? And oh yeah, Peaches, I remember doing the same thing. The buff was like right behind us. And you were at Kadena, Peaches. How often did you have the F-15 Eagles tuck up under you? You'd take off you'd take off on the outside runway, and the F-15s would take off on the inside runway, and you'd literally meet up before you went through, like 3,000 feet. I'm sure you probably got to do that. So we would do mixed MITOs, minimum interval takeoffs, with some of these big airplanes. And when I first did it, it was 12 seconds. We'd literally take off behind a B-52 12 seconds apart. And you would time yourself going over the runway hold line. And you'd tell the navigator when the B-52 went across the hold line, hack clock. And they'd push the stopwatch, 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4, 5 potato, 6 potato, 7 potato, until 12 seconds. And then you would go over that line at 12 seconds also. And that meant you were about, I think it was 250 feet apart. It wasn't very much, but you would take off that way with the B-52 in front of you and then the tanker right behind the B-52. And we would offset just a little bit, point our nose just to offset a little bit, just so that we weren't flying in their wake. I've been involved. Oh, yeah. Coronet join ups out of Bangor. Boy, we could spend a whole lot of time on that, couldn't we, Peaches? I've been involved in 5 ship minimum interval takeoffs with tankers. 5 tankers taking off 12 seconds apart. And it's sporting. It gets your attention, and you're not very far apart. And you have a fan heading that you go to, with the first airplane going runway heading and everybody else going, I think it was 5 degrees off. So you're kind of spread out, but you'd climb out, join up. You would fly 500 feet low and a mile back until you leveled off, and then you stacked up 500 feet and a mile as 5 ships. And we did this all the time during Desert Storm. We would fly 5 ships of tankers and 5 ship cells to refuel these big packages, 32 F-16s going downtown or going after something. And it's just, it's a lot of work. It's pretty crazy. I was sitting in an airplane once that it wasn't 12 seconds. It was probably more like 8. And I was sitting in the back of the plane and could see the left wingtip of the airplane in front of us out the aircraft commander's window, looking through the cockpit door. We were really close. Really close. Yeah, you're right, Michelle. It was sporty, okay? But you know what? We did it so often that, and obviously we briefed these things up whenever we did them. There was abort procedures for this. That was the scary part, is if airplane or 2 airplanes in front of you aborted and then 2 airplanes behind them had to abort at the same time. That got pretty scary. Never had that happen to me though, Michelle. Every time I did a minimum interval takeoff, either at 12 seconds or one that we called an extended MITO, which we did in the R models, because the R model was considered a heavy aircraft because it weighed over 300,000 pounds when it was loaded with 180,000 pounds of gas. And so we'd do 30-second MITOs. Yeah, MITOs are not for everyone. Hey, Peaches, did you know that that's back in the syllabus now? The weapons school syllabus? And all the units are doing MITOs now. It went away for a long time, but now they're doing them again. Okay. But I think they're only doing 30-second MITOs. They're not doing 12 like we did in the A models. They're doing 30-second MITOs. Yeah. It's interesting because it went back into the weapons school syllabus, Peaches, and then the weapons school bubbas all went to their units and started training everybody up on them. But yeah, it's a pretty sporty deal, particularly, like I said, when you have 5 airplanes going. And then during our operational readiness inspections, I was stationed at Pease Air Force Base first. We had FB-111s. The FB-111s would take off at 12 seconds, and then we would take off 12 seconds behind them. We'd have 5 FB-111s take off, and then 5 tankers take off during our ORI, our operational readiness inspection, which is like the wings report card. We would fly from Pease and sometimes go all the way out to Colorado. There were several low-level routes that the F-111s would fly over Colorado. And because that terrain was very close to the type of terrain that they would fly through on their nuclear missions. So, yeah, we'd do this 10 ship of airplanes heading out. And the rendezvous were, yeah, yeah, 6 ship anchors, 3 through 6, man. You get tossed around. We would do these 10 ship formations. And what would happen is the FB 111s wouldn't go as high as the tankers, or is it the other way around? The other way around. The tankers would stay kind of in the low 20s. The FB 111 bombers would go to the high 20s. And we did what's called an en route rendezvous, where the FB 111s would come down on top of us from their altitude and come down like this and would just literally come right underneath us. And again, that's how we did our strategic mission, was with en route rendezvous like that with the FB 111s. The B 52s was completely different. But the en route rendezvous worked out great. The FB 111s could be up high at their, fuel cruise. We could be down lower at ours, and it was pretty crazy doing that, though, particularly as a 10 ship, 5 tankers. And then, like I said, they do these en route rendezvous, and all 5 of the FB 111s would come down out of their altitude and come up underneath us and get refueled. And then they'd get all their gas, usually about 60,000 pounds if we're going out to Colorado. And then when they were done, we'd turn around and we'd land. If we're doing Colorado missions, we'd land at either Hill Air Force Base, Mountain Home Air Force Base, Peterson Air Force Base, because we didn't have the gas to get home. This was in the A models. Our models would be completely different. So pretty crazy. Yeah, the Aussies, what did the Aussies called it? The pig. I'll tell you something. Maybe I've told you guys this before, and if I have, stop me. During Iraqi freedom and the Shock and Awe campaign, the Australians were involved. And the guy that was the head of their planning cell was this one guy, tall. And Peaches, remember this guy, this Aussie guy? He looked like he was half asleep most of the time. But I was talking to him one day, and I says, well, what's your background? What do you do? And he says, oh, I'm an F-111 guy, but I'm the guy that came up with our mission planning process, all that kind of stuff. I go, oh, that's pretty cool. And I asked him, I says, hey, I'm just curious, where did you go to school and what you get your degree in? He says, well, I went to some school near Sydney, Australia, and it was a technical school, engineering school. And he had his master's degree in quantum physics. And I told this guy, I don't even know what quantum physics is. And you've got a master's degree in it? I said, what is it? He says, it's a lot of math. And I go, okay. But he was one of the smartest guys up there in the mission planning cell, and always had some great inputs for everybody when we were doing some of these, really crazy missions. The Australians brought over a bunch of their Hornets. They didn't have Super Hornets yet. They had Legacy Hornets, and they were flying missions over Iraq and everything. So great group of guys, great people. And they took some of the really tough missions too, really tough missions, which was great. Okay. Any other questions? Mitos, man. I can't believe we got into Mitos. So Fatty's talking about 6 ship anchors were always a hoot if you were 3 through 6. What he's talking about there is an anchor area is like a NASCAR racetrack. We would make them 35 miles wide, 70 miles long, always left-hand turn. And when you were in the middle of the pack to the end of the pack, you're kind of at the end of the whip. And Peaches, remember mid-mission join-ups for Northern Watch, where when you would be like tail end Charlie, okay, in the RAS, same thing. And we would do these mid-mission join-ups where you'd have 3 to 4 tankers already out there refueling, and you would come in behind and stack in behind. Now, the crazy thing was mid-mission join-ups and rejoins were prohibited in the States. And here we are now flying combat missions, and what are we doing? The very thing that's restricted back home, mid-mission join-ups. So we got to do them over Northern Watch. And Peaches, did you ever go to Diego and fly some missions out of Diego with the buffs and the bones? We would do the same thing there. But the really cool thing was you were joining on tankers that were already in the area. And you had to be really careful because airplanes may be refueling on them already. So you had to be really, really careful about joining as the tail end Charlie on the tanker formation because you're a thumb rate. The thumb. That's thumb rate Oman. And so you had to be really careful when you were joining in because there was other airplanes that were refueling. And whenever the receivers, and this was F-15Cs, F-15Es, EF-111 Spark Barks, F-16s, EA-6Bs, whenever they were finished refueling, they would always climb up. And you were joining in the back and you were at the top of the stack. So you always had to be really careful when you're coming in from behind and joining up that way. But usually as soon as you showed up and you rolled in behind the stack, somebody was right on top of you wanting gas. Welcome, Wayne. Welcome back. I was in Incirlik in 2000 and 2001. That was my first deployment after 9/11 was to Incirlik. I had already been on the schedule to go. Great opportunity for me in the 97th Air Refueling Squadron just to go fly missions, just to be as we say, LCAC and a KC, Lieutenant Colonel Aircraft Commander and a KC-135, and just fly missions. But our wing commander told us, you're going to be there for a while. And we left 8 days after 9/11. So we got there on about the 20th of September. Missions were already going, and we didn't come home until December. We were there for quite a while. But you can't ask for a better place to get stuck. Yeah, Pop's leather. Hey, Peaches. Still have mine. Pop's leather wallet. It's coming apart. I need to get a new one. But I bought this one in 2002 when I was there, and I have kept this wallet ever since. So what Fatty's talking about there is there's this place called Pop's Leather at Incirlik where you could go get your coats, your leather coats detailed. They put darts under so you could raise your arms, put pockets in them and everything. I mean, really trick these things out. Okay. And then Turkish shotguns. The company was called Hulu or something like that. It was HU with the 2 dots above it, LU with the 2 dots above it, or no, Huglu. It was HU with the 2 dots above it, GLU with the 2 dots above it. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. All right. But those shotguns were gorgeous. And I've had people offer me a lot of money for my shotgun because it's all hand carved in the metal and everything. It's beautiful, beautiful work. And No two shotguns looked identical because, again, they were all hand carved. All right. Oh, Peaches, you know what happened? I had a headset all tricked out, a Bose headset all tricked out with the ear pads, the face mic with the light, that you activated with your, with your lip, the lip light, everything like that. Had the padded on top, everything. And somebody stole it out of my bag when it was in my locker at the 97th. I was so mad. So mad, you know, and nobody fessed up to it, you know. I mean, that headset was completely tricked out. You could wear that thing for hours and not feel the pads and everything in them. I mean, yeah, bastard. Michelle, bastard. um, oh, Ranger, thanks to M1 Abrams. That's interesting. Ranger, you bring up a point there I wouldn't have thought about. Is it pretty loud inside the tanks? You have to wear earplugs? That's interesting. I wouldn't have known that. Anyway, so you could go to these places. I would bring home Persian carpets, Persian rugs, because you could get them over there and you could get them into the States. And you could get Iranian rugs into the States. I've got several of them. I've got one right here beside me, as a matter of fact, on the wall. We would go downtown and debrief our missions with my crew. I had a brand new co-pilot who literally had just gotten mission qualled, had a very experienced boom operator. And this was the co-pilot's very first deployment. And so it was fun teaching him a lot of the things that we would teach in the weapons school. And he really took to it. And as a matter of fact, he became a student and he went through the KC-135 weapons school years later. Danny Menashe. I don't know if you ever met Danny Menashe. All right, folks. I got to run. Thank you once again for being with me tonight. Peaches, it's great to see you, brother. He and I go back a few minutes and some great times. And when I say Peaches is a tanker expert, I really mean that. And he was so instrumental on our team during the Baghdad Bash in 2003. And brother, we couldn't have done it without you, man. Kanga could have done it without us, huh? I want a donut. I want a donut. Chocolate donut with sprinkles on it. I've told you guys all that story. It's too funny. I'll tell it again some other time. I was being very unprofessional, but it was still funny how it turned out. So, be back up Thursday at around 7:00. Once again, I'm going to read this article about Midnight Hammer in the Air Force magazine and see what it has to say. There's a lot more coming out about it now. And, I talk about Peaches being one of these great KC-135 experts. Okay. He was also one of our weapons school graduates. And Peaches, which class did you go through? Just type it in the chat real quick. Let me know which class you went through. But that school gave you literally a PhD in global air refueling operations and into a lot of other things too. And that's why we're as good as we are. Class number 5. Okay. The B-2 bombers that went and did this Midnight Hammer airstrike. It says that most of the folks that were flying were grads of the B-2 weapons school. There's a reason they go to these people, is because of their training and experience. excuse me, I would say their education and experience. The weapons school is a very, very tough school to get through, and a lot of people don't make it through. So, whenever you see missions like this, you could pretty much bet Air Force Weapons School graduates planned the mission, flew the mission, and debriefed the mission. Anyway, I'll be back again Thursday night. Thanks again for coming and just sitting down with me on this live. I really appreciate it. And it's great. It's a lot of fun for me to see a lot of the same names coming up here. We've got a few that I haven't seen before tonight. Panther S, you're one. The Brit, you're another one. And again, thanks for tuning in, asking questions, and good night, my friend. Thanks for being here. Peaches, I'll give you a call here pretty soon. We got to get you on the show, okay? But can't do it next week, Peaches. I'm going to Tailhook. They've invited me back to Tailhook. They want me to be a member, and I will make sure to tell Shortney Gortney, that you said hello, okay? That's another one of those funny stories that we'll talk about some other time. All right. My good friend Peaches had a yeah. Shortney Gortney's going to be there. He's the president of Tailhook. And we're driving over. So like I said, next Tuesday, because I'll be on the road, I doubt we'll do this. It depends on what time we get over to my sister-in-law's place. She lives up in the mountains, Sierra Nevada mountains. I don't know what kind of Wi-Fi coverage they have there. I may be doing it on a phone, but if I can get connected on next Tuesday night, we'll reconnect. Okay. Thursday night, be here again between 7 and 7:15. And I'll read through this article on Midnight Hammer and we'll talk about that. All right, folks. Thanks again. Talk to you later. Sluggo out here.